starting the day here in Avard or Avard, Oklahoma, and you can probably hear the railroad, the trains passing by, and that was how this town got kind of started and incorporated. It was a very busy place with because of the railroad passed through here, and it was a center for agriculture, and it was became a very kind of rough and tumble western town, and it grew through the 1920s into the 30s. Then there was the Depression and the Dust Bowl, which certainly hurt, and then there were back-to-back years where they had tornadoes that hit this town. Obviously that hurt things, but the entire town responded by building a tornado shelter that could house the entire town. Pretty interesting. But then later in years it became just kind of more, remote out here. The big highways passed it, and got dwindled smaller and smaller, but the railroad is still busy. Multiple trains have passed through since I've been here, so very, very cool place to start, and definitely a neat place to visit. I've not been able to find a lot about Hopeton, although right behind me, which is very interesting, is the Hopeton State Bank. And it's very unusual because it looks like it's still in business, and it's a very nice, modern bank, and basically a ghost town. It's very strange. Obviously, maybe the rural, agricultural community, maybe banks here. But I read this is an independent bank that was opened in 1919, and like I said, I don't know too much about the town, except for a post office was opened in 1894. That's really early in Oklahoma's history in terms of the land runs, and but I don't know much about it other than that. The layout is interesting. You can hear cars, but that's on 281, which is just, it's right over there. You can almost touch it. And this was probably more the original road in this area that goes right through the town. And then they made 281, which just bypasses it by, a couple hundred yards. So interesting. There are some new houses and older abandoned houses and buildings, and I believe a church. So probably the drone view will give you an idea of, it's just a little bit of a different kind of a layout. Capron is listed as online as an inactive town. I don't exactly know what that means, but pretty much feels like a ghost town as I walk around and explore. It's interesting history though. It was originally called Warren. They put a railroad in here, and they needed to. They wanted to change the name, so they came up with the name Sterling. And there was a Sterling, Kansas, that was on the same Santa Fe rail line, so they couldn't have two Santa Fe's, even though they were in different states. So then they went with a couple other ones like Virgil and Kermit, and same kind of deal. There was already places named that, and they finally came up with Capron. Was named after a guy who was in Teddy Roosevelt's Rough Riders group, which is an interesting. If you go back into history and start learning about the Rough Riders, but he was one of the men that was in that group, and so they decided to name the town Capron. It was a pretty successful town, a couple hundred people. There are census figures back quite a ways, and it was, I guess you could say, a pretty successful town. And then in 1939, a tornado came right down Main Street and demolished most everything that was here, all the businesses, or most all the businesses, the school. And I guess the tornado came in the night, and it said that there's so many trains that pass through here, like all the time, that the tornado and a train sound the same. So a lot of people thought it was just a train. They woke up the next morning to come find their businesses demolished. So they rebuilt, and but from there it certainly went downhill, and over time has crumbled, literally crumbled. There's buildings all through Main Street that are crumbling. The school, which was a point of pride in the community for a long time, is crumbling. And so interesting town, certainly a lot of interesting things to see if you like ghost towns and abandoned buildings and old buildings, and pretty good story behind the rise and fall of Capron as well. Just a mile or so down the road from the town of Capron is the cemetery, and I'm ending this video here because kind of a noteworthy story, I guess you could say, in the history of Capron. There's a baseball player named Danny Thompson who he was born in Wichita, and then he moved here to Capron and became a Major League Baseball player and played for 7 years in the major leagues, mostly in the Minnesota Twins organization, and then he was traded to the Texas Rangers right at the end of his career. And he wasn't just a baseball player. That was, not the story. It would be remarkable for a town like this to have a professional athlete like that. But his story is even a little bit more unique because in 1973, in the middle of those 7 years of playing Major League Baseball, he was diagnosed with leukemia, and then ended up playing 4 more years with leukemia. And 10 days after his final at-bat with the Texas Rangers, he passed away. And he's buried here in this cemetery right there, and next to his wife. And so, you know, there's definitely a legacy of that started when he passed away, of cancer funding. There was a golf tournament that was kind of organized by Harmon Killebrew, who was a famous baseball player of the day. Gerald Ford, former president of the United States, and Mickey Mantle were part of the first group that played in that tournament to help raise money for leukemia research. And so obviously it's kind of sad when you think about that, but also pretty awesome for a town like Capron that's very small nowadays to have someone that achieved heights of professional sports and then helped raise money to battle leukemia for decades and decades later.